The year was 1870, and the frontier had a cruel way of testing those who dreamed of love. Dust rose like breath from the bones of the earth, rolling across the Montana plain in slow, ghostly waves. When the stagecoach rattled to a stop before the post office in Bitter Hollow, its wheels sank into the ruts of the main street, groaning as if the journey had been too long even for them. Evelyn Harper stepped down into the heat, clutching a letter so worn the ink had begun to fade. Her boots struck dry earth. The wind lifted her skirt and sent her bonnet ribbons snapping. She squinted against the glare, eyes stinging from the dust, and searched the street for the man whose name she had whispered every night for months. Thomas Grady. Her future, her husband-to-be. He wasn't there. Around her, the town moved like a restless animal. Men unloading wagons, a blacksmith hammering sparks from an anvil, children chasing each other between buildings that looked half-finished, half-forgotten. The saloon doors creaked open, spilling laughter that sounded more like mockery than joy. Somewhere, a dog barked at nothing. Evelyn's heart beat with both hope and dread. She had imagined this day so many times. Thomas smiling, tipping his hat, saying he'd known her from the moment he saw her. She'd written to him for nearly a year, answering an advertisement that promised a good life on his ranch, a fresh start for a woman of sound mind and heart. She'd poured herself into those letters, confessing her fears, her loneliness, her dreams of a small home filled with laughter. He'd written back kind words, bold ones even, said he didn't need a fancy lady, just a woman who'd stand by him. And now she was here. The driver tossed her small trunk to the dirt, where it landed with a thud. Evelyn thanked him quietly, though he barely met her eyes. Folks had been doing that since she boarded the coach back in St. Louis, looking away when she smiled, glancing at her figure, whispering. She'd grown used to it. Though it still burned, she brushed the dust from her dress and looked again. A tall man leaned against the porch rail outside the general store, hat tipped low, a cigar burning between his fingers. He was watching her. When their eyes met, he straightened, flicked away the cigar, and strode toward her. Thomas Grady. He was just as she remembered from a photograph he'd sent. Broad shoulders, sharp jaw, the easy confidence of a man used to getting his way. For a moment, Evelyn's heart swelled. She smiled, stepping forward, clutching the letter as if it were proof of her belonging. "Mr. Grady?" she asked softly. He looked her over slowly, eyes moving from her bonnet to her boots, his expression hardening with every inch. When he finally met her gaze, there was no warmth. "So you're Evelyn Harper," he said. His voice was smooth, but beneath it lay something cold. "Didn't quite picture you that way." Her smile faltered. "Aye. Perhaps the journey's taken a toll. The coach was long, and—" He cut her off with a laugh that made nearby men turn to listen. "Long? You could have walked the distance and not changed much." The words hit her like a slap. Heat flooded her cheeks. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice though his tone was still sharp enough to slice. "You should have been honest in your letters. I was expecting a woman I could bring into town without shame. Not—" He glanced around at the watching faces, then back at her. "Not this." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone chuckled. The world tilted, and Evelyn's fingers trembled around the letter. "I told you who I was," she whispered. "I told you everything." He sneered. "You told me words. You didn't send the truth." He plucked the letter from her hand, tore it down the middle, and let the pieces fall into the dust. "I won't marry a liar. Go back east where you belong." She stood frozen as he turned and walked away. The crowd broke into murmurs, some pitying, most cruel. A woman near the post office clucked her tongue and said something about false hopes. A man laughed and muttered, "Ain't no ranch horse that'd carry that load." Evelyn wanted to run, but her knees wouldn't move. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. The coach that had brought her here was already pulling away, wheels grinding down the road that had been her only path forward. She was alone. A soft voice cut through the noise. "Come on now, miss. Don't stand there for their amusement." She turned. A stout woman in a plain gray dress and bonnet stood nearby, her face lined with kindness. "Name's Martha O'Leary," she said. "Sheriff's wife. You come along with me. We'll get you settled for the night. Evelyn wanted to refuse, to hide her shame somewhere dark, but Martha's hand was firm on her arm. Together they walked through the staring crowd toward a small house behind the jail. Inside, the air smelled of soap and wood smoke. Martha set her by the fire, poured tea, and said gently, "Men can be cruel fools. Don't let this one break you." Evelyn tried to smile, but her voice came out small. "He was supposed to be my future." "Then maybe the Lord's sparing you from a bad one," Martha said, setting down the cup. "Sleep now. Tomorrow looked different." But tomorrow didn't bring kindness. When Evelyn woke, the sheriff was gone and Martha had gone to the market. Evelyn folded her borrowed blanket, tidied the small space, and stepped outside with her trunk. The town felt sharper now, the wind colder. People looked at her the way they looked at a stray dog, something pitiful but not to be helped. She asked for work at the bakery. The woman behind the counter shook her head. No room. At the dress shop, the seamstress frowned. Don't need help. At the boarding house, the owner laughed outright. A mail order reject? Best move along before the saloon decides you're good for something else. By noon, she was hungry and dizzy. She sat by the well, staring at her hands, callous from years of work back home. She'd been a caretaker for her mother, a seamstress, a friend to every lonely neighbor. She had always believed her heart was her worth. But out here, hearts didn't seem to matter. She rose, shoulders straight despite the ache inside. If no one would hire her, she'd find another way. She walked toward the edge of town, past the church and the last few cabins, until the land opened wide again. The wind tore at her skirts, carrying the scent of rain and dust. A storm was coming. Dark clouds crawled over the mountains. She turned back once, seeing Bitter Hollow fade into a blur gray. Then the first drops fell, cold, sharp. Within minutes the rain turned fierce, slanting sideways with the wind. Evelyn stumbled along the road, her trunk slipping from her hands. She dragged it a few feet before giving up, sinking to her knees in the mud. Lightning split the sky. The sound rolled across the plain like the earth itself groaning. She pulled her shawl tight, shivering. "God," she whispered, "I tried to do right. I just wanted to be loved." Her voice was swallowed by the storm. When she looked up again, a figure on horseback was cutting through the rain. The rider moved slow but steady, a long coat whipping around him, hat pulled low. For a moment she thought she was imagining him, some ghost riding out of thunder. But then he reined in the horse, and she saw his face. He wasn't young, but there was strength in him, the kind that came from surviving things most men couldn't. A scar cut through his right eyebrow, and his left leg moved stiffly as he dismounted. He stepped toward her, boots sinking into the mud. "Ma'am," he said, voice rough from disuse. "You all right?" She tried to answer, but her teeth chattered too hard. He crouched, steadying her with one callous hand. "You're half frozen. Ain't safe to be out in this." She shook her head weakly. "No, nowhere to go." His eyes softened, though his tone stayed matter-of-fact. "Then you come with me. My place ain't far." Before she could protest, he lifted her with surprising gentleness and set her on his horse. The warmth of the animal seeped through her soaked clothes. He mounted behind her, one arm braced around her, so she wouldn't fall. They rode to the rain, the world reduced to wind, thunder, and the rhythmic thud of hooves. She didn't know how long they traveled, minutes, hours, but eventually the storm began to fade. A small cabin appeared ahead, perched on a rise above a creek swollen with rainwater. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. The man helped her down and guided her inside. The cabin was plain but tidy, a single room with a hearth, a rough-hewn table, and a bed covered in wool blankets. He lit a lantern, the soft glow painting his features, dark hair streaked with gray, eyes the color of wet soil. "Name's Caleb Boone," he said, hanging his hat. "You can dry off by the fire." She hesitated, still clutching her shawl. "I don't mean to trouble you." "Trouble's already come and gone," he replied. "You'll do me no harm." He tossed wood into the hearth, coaxing flame to life. The warmth spread, filling the small space. Evelyn moved closer, her fingers trembling as she held them out. Steam rose from her dress. Caleb poured her a cup of water, then busied himself checking a rifle by the door, as if uncertain what else to do with company. Silence hung between them, broken only by the crackle of fire. Finally, he spoke without looking up. "Town folks can be cruel. You from Bitter Hollow." "I was," she murmured. "Not anymore." He nodded slowly, as though he understood more than she'd said. "Ain't much good there. Folks judge quick, forget slow." Evelyn's eyes met his. "Why'd you help me?" He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it." She studied him, sensing a weight in his voice, a past he didn't intend to share. Still, something in his presence steadied her. He moved with quiet certainty, like a man who'd built his life alone and learned to survive it. As the fire warmed the room, exhaustion pulled at her. Caleb handed her a blanket and nodded toward the bed. "You take it. I'll sit by the fire." "I can't." "Ma'am," he interrupted gently. "Ain't negotiable." Her protest died. She lay down, the scent of smoke and pine filling her senses. Through half-closed eyes, she watched him sit in the chair, rifle across his lap, gaze fixed on the window where rain still whispered against the glass. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin there was peace, a fragile, fleeting kind, like the quiet after a gunshot. Evelyn's last thought before sleep took her was a simple one, trembling with wonder and fear alike. Asterisk, maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's something beginning. Asterisk. Thunder rolled again and the light flickered. Two souls, each marked by loss and loneliness, had crossed paths by accident, or maybe by something greater. And though neither of them knew it yet, the storm outside was nothing compared to the one the world still had waiting for them. Morning broke o'er the hills in a hush of gold and smoke. The storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed clean but raw, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath and held it. When Evelyn Harper opened her eyes, she was greeted not by the hard ground or the sneers of strangers, but by the crackle of a hearth and the scent of coffee drifting through the air. For a long moment she didn't move, afraid the warmth might vanish if she did. Caleb Boone stood by the window, his frame outlined against the pale light. He was whittling a piece of wood, movement slow and careful, each stroke sure. His limp was more noticeable now that he wasn't on horseback. He shifted his weight gingerly, as though one leg still carried memories of pain that hadn't faded with time. "You're awake," he said without turning. "Yes," she murmured. "How long was I asleep?" "Half a day, maybe more. You were near frozen when I found you." He set the knife down, glancing toward her. "Coffee?" She nodded, sitting up. The blanket slid from her shoulders, and she flushed when she realized her dress had dried stiff from the fire's heat. Her hair, usually tied neat, hung loose around her face. She must have looked a fright. He poured her a cup and handed it over. The porcelain was chipped but clean. "Ain't fancy," he said, "but it'll warm you." "It's more than I deserve," she whispered. "Don't say that." His tone was gentle, but firm enough to quiet her protest. She sipped the bitter drink, watching him over the rim of the cup. His face was tanned and lined, not with age but with hard years. The kind of years that leave a man alone long enough to forget how to smile. "I'll work for my keep," she said suddenly. "I won't be a burden." Caleb looked at her for a long moment before replying. "I didn't bring you here to earn your stay, ma'am. You needed help. That's enough. But I can cook, mend clothes, tend the animals." He raised a hand, stopping her. "Then do it if you want. Not because you owe me." Evelyn stared at him, unsure what to make of his kindness. No man had ever spoken to her that way. Not her father, not the shopkeepers back east, and certainly not Thomas Grady. It unsettled her almost as much as it soothed her. Outside, the land glimmered beneath the washed sky, rolling hills dotted with pines, a thin ribbon of stream winding through them. She rose, still stiff from sleep, and stepped to the doorway. The cabin stood alone against miles of wilderness. Beyond the ridge, smoke rose faintly from another ranch, far off. "You live here all by yourself?" she asked. He nodded. "Since my brother passed. Used to run this place together. Now it's just me." She wanted to ask more, but his tone made it clear the subject wasn't one he shared lightly. So instead, she said, it's peaceful. He gave a half smile. Most days, other days, it's just quiet enough to remember everything you wish you forget. The silence between them deepened, thick but not uncomfortable. She set her cup down and went to the door. Where's your barn? He frowned slightly. You shouldn't be working already. I need to. It helps me think. He studied her a moment, then pointed toward a low building at the edge of clearing. If it helps you think, there's plenty to be done. The barn smelled of hay and old leather. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight, spilling through the cracks in the roof. Evelyn rolled up her sleeves, found a broom, and began to sweep. The rhythm steadied her, each stroke a reminder that she could still make herself useful. By noon, she cleaned the floor, fed the chickens, and even patched a torn feed sack she found near the stall. When she stepped outside again, the sun was high. Caleb was mending a fence post near the paddock, his shirt damp with sweat, his movements deliberate but slowed by his limp. She crossed the field and knelt beside him, holding a loose rail steady as he hammered it in place. "Hand me the nails," he said, and when she did, his fingers brushed hers. She felt a flicker of warmth that startled her more than it should have. They worked in silence until the fence stood firm again. When it was done, Caleb leaned on the hammer and looked at her. "You work like someone who's known hard days." She gave a short laugh. "I've known plenty. That man who left you, he the reason you were out in that storm?" Her throat tightened. "You want to tell me about it?" "Not much to tell," she said softly. "I answered his ad. I thought—" She paused, choosing the words carefully. "I thought if I worked hard enough, loved deep enough, I could make someone see me." Caleb's gaze didn't waver. "And he didn't?" "He saw me. He just didn't like what he saw." Caleb was quiet for a long time. The hammer hung loose in his hand. Then he said, "A man like that ain't worth a thought. Some folks wouldn't recognize gold if it was sitting in their palm." She looked up sharply, surprised. He turned away, busying himself with the fence again, but the words lingered, warming her more than the sun ever could. As the days passed, the rhythm of their life took shape. Evelyn cooked meals, washed clothes, and cared for the animals. Caleb repaired tools, hunted, and kept mostly to himself. But in the evenings, when the lights softened and the coyotes called in the distance, they talked. Not much, but enough. He told her about the fire that had taken his brother, how the ranch they built together had been burned down by raiders years ago. He'd rebuilt alone, brick by stubborn brick. The limp came from that same night, a bullet that never quite healed. She told him about her mother's passing, the endless small-town gossip, the way people always found her too much of something, too soft, too wide, too hopeful. Caleb never interrupted, never pitted. He listened. One evening, a windstorm swept down from the mountains. They worked together to tie down the shutters, to cover the firewood with tarps. When the gusts hit, tearing at the roof, Evelyn stood beside him, clutching the edge of the table while the cabin creaked like an old ship at sea. She should have been afraid, but she wasn't. Caleb's calm was steady as the flame in the lantern. When it passed, he let out a breath. That one tested the boards. Evelyn smiled faintly, but were still standing. He looked at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Yeah," he said, "we are." The next morning brought trouble. Caleb went into town for supplies, leaving Evelyn to tend the homestead. She was hanging laundry when she heard hooves in the distance. At first, she thought it was him returning early, but when she saw the riders crest the hill, 3 of them, rough-faced, rifles slung across their saddles, her stomach turned cold. One of the men called out, "Morning, miss. Fine day to be neighborly." Evelyn stepped back toward the porch. "Caleb's not here," she said. "That's so." The man grinned, showing a row of yellow teeth. "Then maybe you'll do us the favor instead." They dismounted. The leader, a thin man with a scar running from jaw to ear, tipped his hat mockingly. "We're looking for Thomas Grady. Heard tell he's been sniffing around these parts." The name hit her like a gunshot. "He's not here," she said, forcing her voice steady. The man's grin widened. "You know him, then." Before she could answer, another rider spat into the dirt. Don't matter. We'll find him. You tell Boone we came by. They turned their horses, but the leader lingered a moment longer. And if that fancy boy shows his face again, tell him he owes me blood. When they finally rode off, Evelyn's hands were shaking. She bolted the door and waited until Caleb returned. He listened in silence as she told him what happened. His jaw tightened, and his hand went to the scar on his shoulder as though it burned anew. Grady used to run with those men, he said. Thieves, rustlers, worse. Guess he's still at it. So they'll come back? Maybe, but not if they know we're ready. That night, Caleb cleaned his rifle, the metal gleaming in the firelight. Evelyn helped, her hands trembling but steady enough to load the shells. When she caught his glance, he nodded. You ever use one? No. Then you'll learn, just in case. They practiced behind the barn, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the cold air. Her first shot missed by a mile. The second was closer. By the fourth, she clipped the edge of the tin can. Caleb smiled faintly. Good aim. You've got grit. I've got fear, she said. Same thing when you use it right. In the days that followed, their bond deepened in ways neither dared name. He found her laughter contagious. She found his silence comforting. One evening, while mending his torn shirt, she noticed a long scar along his ribs. You were lucky, she murmured. He shook his head. Wasn't luck. My brother pushed me clear. He wasn't so lucky. She reached out, hesitating before her fingers brushed his arm. I'm sorry. He met her gaze. Don't be. Some things you just live through, others you live for. The words lingered between them like a promise half-spoken. One cold night, thunder rumbled again in the distance, echoing against the hills. Caleb stirred the fire, eyes fixed on the flames. I don't sleep easy when storms come, he admitted. Too many memories and the noise. Evelyn rose and laid a hand on his shoulder. Then I'll keep the fire going for both of us. He looked up at her, and for a heartbeat neither moved. The firelight painted her face in gold, and in her eyes he saw not pity, but strength, the kind that carried her through shame, hunger, and heartbreak without breaking. I don't know what I'd do without you here, he said quietly.
She smiled. You'd manage. You seem the sort who always does. Maybe, he said, but I wouldn't want to. Outside, the thunder rolled nearer. Inside, something unspoken settled between them. Something fragile yet fierce. Evelyn sat by the fire, sewing by the dim light, while Caleb leaned back in his chair, the rifle resting across his knees. He studied her face, the calm set of her jaw, the soft hum of her breath. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but low. Caleb, when those men come back, and they will, I won't run. He nodded once. Didn't think you would. She looked into the flames, their reflections dancing in her eyes. He took everything from me once, my dignity, my hope. I won't let him take my peace. Caleb's gaze softened. You've got more courage than most men I've met. She smiled faintly. Maybe I'm just too stubborn to give up. The storm outside broke into rain again, pattering against the roof like soft applause. Caleb shifted closer, the warmth between them deepening. For a long while, they sat in silence. Then, without looking at her, he said, You're welcome to stay here as long as you like. This place fits better with you in it. Evelyn's throat tightened. And if I stay? He turned toward her, his voice quiet but sure. Then we'll face whatever comes. Together. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the air. Beyond the window, lightning split the sky once more, carving the world into fleeting brightness and shadow. Evelyn didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether Grady's men would return, or what her heart might yet risk. But for the first time since she stepped off that stagecoach, she wasn't afraid of being seen. She reached across the table, her hand finding his. Outside, the rain fell steady, washing away the dust of Bitter Hollow. Inside the cabin, two souls, once lost to the storm, found the first fragile piece of belonging. And though the wind still whispered of danger on the horizon, neither looked away. They had both been broken once. Now, together, they were learning how to be whole again. The morning broke cold and gray, the kind that made breath fog in the air and boots stiff with frost. The ranch lay quiet, the hills still wrapped in mist. But inside the cabin, a storm was brewing that no wind could match. Clara stood by the window, watching the outline of Thomas's figure ride away, his hat low, his back straight, stubborn as ever. He'd gone before dawn, saying he needed to check the north pasture, but she knew it wasn't cattle he was after. It was Caleb and the men he'd hired, the same men who'd threatened the ranch last night. They'd come again, and this time, Thomas wasn't about to run. Her heart ached with both fear and something she couldn't name, something she hadn't felt since the day she stepped off that train in Laramie and was told she wasn't wanted. But Thomas had seen her since then, not the size of her body, but the size of her will. And now he was riding into danger because of her. She turned from the window, her hands trembling as she packed the medicine pouch and filled her satchel. "You're not leaving me behind this time," she whispered. The barn door creaked open as she saddled her mare, Dusty. The horse tossed its head, sensing her urgency. Clara mounted, pulling her coat tight around her. "Hold on, Thomas," she said, heels nudging the horse forward. The cold bit her cheeks, but she didn't slow. The hills opened before her, rolling, silent, and endless. The wind howled through the pines, carrying the faint echo of something distant, gunfire. Her heart seized. She pushed Dusty harder, the horse's hooves pounding against frozen earth. By the time she reached the ridge, smoke was curling up from the valley below. There, near the old river crossing, she saw them. Thomas, crouched behind a fallen log, his rifle aimed steady. Across the stream were 4 riders, Caleb among them, their faces shadowed by their hats, their laughter sharp as blades. Caleb's voice carried over the water. "Come now, Thomas. Ain't no need to die over a woman who don't belong here." Thomas didn't answer. He just fired. The crack split the morning like thunder. One of Caleb's men fell from his horse. The others scattered behind rocks, returning fire. Clara froze for only a heartbeat, then dismounted, crawling through the tall grass toward Thomas. Bullets tore through the air above her, the sound screaming past her ears. "Thomas," she hissed when she reached him. His eyes flicked to her, wide with disbelief. "What in God's name, Clara? You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," she shot back, gripping his arm. "You can't fight 4 men alone." He clenched his jaw. "Ain't about fighting alone. It's about finishing what they started." Caleb's voice rang out again. "I told you, Thomas. That ranch is mine by spring. You're just delaying what's coming." Thomas loaded another round, breathing hard. "Over my dead body." "Then so be it." The gunfire started again. Wood splintered, dirt flew. Clara's heart hammered. She looked around, her eyes catching the old wagon bridge, half collapsed, but still standing. An idea sparked. "Thomas," she said, tugging his sleeve. "The bridge. If we can get across and take the ridge, we'll have cover. They'll be in the open." He glanced at the rickety structure. "That thing's liable to fall apart under a rabbit." "Then we'll make it hold," she said, determination burning in her voice. "Come on." They moved low and fast, using the smoke and the curve of the land for cover. Caleb saw them halfway across and shouted, "They're running." Clara turned back, fired a shot that kicked dust near Caleb's boots. "You're wrong," she called. "We're not running anymore." Thomas looked at her, half shocked, half proud. "Remind me never to argue with you again." "Good," she said, cocking the rifle. "Now shoot." They reached the far bank, climbing to higher ground. Thomas's aim was true. He hit one of the riders in the shoulder, sending the man spinning from his horse. Caleb's men hesitated, their confidence cracking. But Caleb didn't retreat. He urged his horse forward, rage twisting his features. "You think you can take what's mine, woman?" he roared. "She was never yours," Thomas shouted back. Clara's pulse thudded in her ears. She raised her rifle, her hands steady. "And this land was never yours either." She pulled the trigger. The shot echoed like judgment itself. Caleb's hat flew off as the bullet grazed his temple, knocking him backward. His horse reared, sending him tumbling into the icy water below. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the river and the wind. The remaining riders turned and fled, leaving their leader half-submerged and gasping. Thomas lowered his rifle. His breath came in ragged bursts. You saved my life." Clara shook her head, tears freezing on her lashes. "We saved each other." They stood there, side by side, as the sun began to pierce through the fog. The light spilled over the hills, painting the land in gold and ash. Thomas reached out, his hand trembling, and brushed the soot from her cheek. "You shouldn't have followed me." "I wasn't going to lose you," she said softly. "Not like I lost everything else." He looked at her then, really looked like a man seeing the world anew. "Clara," he said, his voice breaking, "I never cared what they said about you. You're stronger than any woman I've ever known." She managed a shaky smile. "You didn't have to say it. You showed me." He took her hand. "Still, I reckon some things ought to be said plain." He swallowed hard. "You came here for a husband. Well, if you'll still have me, I'd be honored to be that man." Her breath caught. "Thomas, I ain't perfect," he went on, "and I ain't rich. But I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you know you're wanted." Her tears spilled then, warm despite the cold. She nodded, unable to speak. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like the promise of spring after a long, brutal winter. Behind them, Caleb struggled to his feet in the shallows, fury twisting his face. "You think this is over?" he spat, drawing the pistol from his belt. Thomas spun, but the shot rang out before he could fire. Caleb staggered, eyes wide, and fell face first into the current. Clara lowered the smoking rifle, her hands steady. "Now it's over." The silence that followed was deep and sacred. The river carried Caleb's body away, the current erasing him like a bad dream. By the time they rode back to the ranch, the sky was bleeding orange with sunset. The cattle grazed quiet, the world at peace again for now. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled to life. Thomas sat at the table, bandaging his arm while Clara stirred a pot of stew. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and healing. "You know," he said after a while, "when you first showed up, I didn't think you'd last a week." She looked over her shoulder, eyebrow raised. "And now," he said with a grin, "I reckon you're the toughest soul on this side of the Rockies." She chuckled, ladling the stew into bowls. "You talk too much, Thomas." He took the bowl she offered and lifted it in a small salute. "To second chances." She clinked hers against his. "And to knowing your worth." They ate in comfortable silence, the storm outside having passed for good. When the meal was done, Thomas rose and fetched a small box from the mantel. "Found this yesterday," he said, opening it. Inside was a simple silver ring. "Was gonna wait till spring, but after today, I figure there's no sense waiting." Clara's hand went to her mouth. "Thomas." He stepped close, his rough hands gentle as he took hers. "You deserve to be chosen, Clara. Not for what someone else sees, but for who you are." She couldn't hold back the tears this time. "I never thought I'd hear those words." He smiled. "Then I guess it's time you did." He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. The wind howled outside, but inside, there was only warmth, the kind that came from more than just fire. Days turned to weeks, and the valley began to thaw. Snow melted into streams, and the fields turned green again. Clara rose each morning before the sun, milking cows, mending fences, laughing with Thomas as they worked side by side. The townsfolk who once whispered behind her back began to change their tune. They saw her ride through town, strong and steady, head held high beside her husband. And though some still muttered about the fat mail-order bride who made good, she didn't hear them anymore. Because the truth was simple and clear. She had built a life worth living, one sunrise at a time. One evening, as the sky burned red over the horizon, Clara stood on the porch, her hand resting on the rail. Thomas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Remember when you first got here?" he said softly. "How could I forget?" she replied with a smile. "I was terrified." He kissed her temple. You were brave. You just didn't know it yet. She leaned into him. Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't opened that door that day? He smiled against her hair. I'd have missed out on the best thing that ever happened to me. The last light faded, and the stars began to bloom across the night sky. And as they stood there, listening to the wind whistle through the pines, Clara thought of how far she'd come, from rejection to belonging, from heartbreak to home. Somewhere out there, another train was arriving, carrying another woman with hope in her heart and fear in her eyes. Clara whispered into the night, Don't you give up, whoever you are. There's love out here, if you're brave enough to believe in it. The world was wide and wild, full of loss and promise alike. But for now, in that small cabin on the edge of the Wyoming frontier, two souls had found what they were searching for. And maybe, she thought, that was all the West ever asked of anyone, to keep riding, no matter how many times you'd been told you weren't enough. Because out here, redemption came not in words, but in the courage to keep going. And as the fire crackled low, Thomas took her hand once more, their fingers intertwining like roots in the soil they'd both fought for. Outside, the coyotes howled. Inside, love answered back.